the Honorable Peter Fox Cohalan.
My father came to Sayville in 1931. Actually, he came to LaSalle Military Academy, where he was the football, baseball, and basketball coach. Back in 1931, he lived at LaSalle Military Academy, and the rum runners used to bring all of the booze from Europe into LaSalle Military Academy on the south shore of Long Island for the edification of the local people. And the Christian brothers who ran LaSalle Military Academy would take their cut. The police, the Isletown police, would take their cut. The local FBI would take their cut. And then the rest would be distributed to all the speakeasies, such as Snapper Inn. And some of the others around. And Sayville, of course, too, and the Howick had it, I guess, years ago. And the law was completely flouted at all times because nobody believed in the in Prohibition, especially in New York State, where the mayor of New York City, Jimmy Walker, used to lead beer parades down Fifth Avenue while wearing a tuxedo at 12 noon. And the governor would be seen, Al Smith would be seen drinking beer or wine or liquor in the governor's office in Albany. But my family originates from Ireland, as you'd expect, on my father's side, and our first ancestor came over here in 1776 with Lafayette. Our ancestor was an Irishman fighting in the French army in the Regiment de Walsh, W-A-L-S-C-H-S-H-E, which was an Irish regiment in the French army. If you wanted to receive a college education back in 1776 in Ireland and you were a Roman Catholic, you had to go to France or Germany or Spain or Italy for your education. And our ancestor was educated at Douai College in France, a Jesuit institution, which was eventually destroyed in the French Revolution, and in an irony of ironies, ended up in England, later on as Downside Abbey. But while my ancestor was studying at Downside Abbey, at the Douai College in France, Lafayette was looking for young Irish boys to fight the English in America, and he came up with the Marquis de Lafayette, and he was his aide-de-camp, or one of his aides-de-camp, and served at Valley Forge, Yorktown, Brandywine, and any of the other places where Lafayette fought. And Lafayette, as you all know, was sort of an adopted son of George Washington. They were very close, so my ancestor, according to family law, got to meet George Washington. The family then settled in Middletown, New York, back in the early part of the 19th century. And, and members of the family were very active in the local community. One of them was a foreman on the building of the Erie Railroad in 1829 or 1830. Others were very active in the local businesses. My father's grandfather was the editor of the local newspaper in Middletown, New York, and was also a Republican leader of Orange County, in 1881. Interestingly enough, my father's great-grandfather was in Middletown in 1845 when they were tearing down the old Presbyterian church to build a new Presbyterian church, and he was the head of the very few people who happened to be Catholic in that community at that time. So he gave a contribution of $25. He was a local squire, and he gave a contribution of $25 to the Presbyterian church, and it's actually in the records of the Presbyterian church in Middletown, New York, not for the purpose of building a new Presbyterian church, but for tearing down the old. So that the Cohalans were very much ensconced in Middletown for over 100 years, and we have 36 members of the family buried up in a family plot in Middletown, New York. And one time when one of my great uncles, one of my father's uncles, had died, he was a New York City lawyer, he was being buried in Middletown, and one of his sisters was screaming out. She was 92 at the time. They're burying Tim in my spot. They're burying Tim in my spot. To which my mother, who had a great sense of humor, turned and said, "Why don't you jump in now and save us a trip?" So my father's father, my grandfather, and his 4 brothers and 2 sisters, all college graduates. This is back in the 1880s and 1890s, which was very, very rare. One of my grandfather's first cousins, a woman, ended up as a college president, as a matter of fact, back in those days. And they all moved to New York City. The children did. The parents stayed in Middletown. And they were all, my father's father and his 4 brothers were all lawyers. 3 ended up on the state Supreme Court in New York County. My father was one of 4 brothers and 2 sisters, all of whom also were college graduates. And My father and his 4 brothers were lawyers. Well, their cousins were lawyers. We have 15 lawyers in the family, so everyone in litigation come to us over 4 generations. And we also happen to hold the record for most Supreme Court justices in the history of any New York family with 5, going back over 100 years. But my father was somewhat constricted by life in New York City, and he decided to move to the country. And he moved to, as I said, to LaSalle Military Academy to coach all the sports in 1931. His family, brothers who stayed in New York City and were lawyers of different sorts in New York City, always called him the farmer because he left the city. One of his brothers ended up as the coach of the New York Knickerbockers, the first coach of the New York Knickerbockers. He was both a lawyer and an athlete. My father was also quite an athlete, 10-letter man in college. He was a poet, he was an author, he was a jurist of some renown, and he had an interest in everything. He and his friend Lloyd Record, who Claire Hinton would remember, Claire Everhart would remember, from we all lived together by Sunset Drive when I was growing up as a kid, were able to quote Shakespeare, where one would end the conversation, the other would pick it up. And they were both extraordinarily brilliant men. Lloyd Record was a court reporter, and the last of the court reporters on Long Island to actually take down the reports of the trial in ink. Now they use machines at all times, and Mr. Record was my father's best friend, and they spent an awful lot of time together playing anagrams, quoting things, and both of them were quite well read in terms of writing for the New York Times and correcting people in their use of the English language, and also correcting quotes that were given in the New York Times. And my father was written up in the New York Times, I think 57 times for correcting mistakes over the years in the New York Times, of which he was proud. He was also, as I said, a poet and an author. He wrote a history of the life of Aaron Burr, the 3rd Vice President of the United States. My family's been active in the Burr societies for over 100 years, and the relationship with one of my father's family members married into the Burr family, so we have a connection there. But the interesting thing is that there are 125 members of the Aaron Burr Society in the United States. 124 named Burr, and we're the other members. And as you know, Aaron Burr, my father wrote a 20,000-word, 2,000-line poem on the life of Aaron Burr in a dactylic hexameter, which is really hard to do, but he did it, and he had it published. Burr was a fascinating man, but that's time for another speech at another time. He also wrote a biography of his own family, which is unpublished, but I've read it, and it's very good. And he also contributed his time to all sorts of athletic endeavors here in Suffolk County. He was very active in the town, in Sayville's Town League baseball and basketball teams with such luminaries as George Spruce and Tony Yonda and Hi Smith. Hi Smith was a great athlete and was also the local mailman and local band leader, who's a daughter of his Pete Smith Frederick, you might know from around Sayville. A very close friend of my father. While my father had come here, as I mentioned, in 1931, he was not the first relative to be here. Our first relative on Long Island was a Catholic priest, the first Catholic priest on Long Island back in 1839. He rode a horse. His name was John McCarthy, and he rode a horse from Greenpoint in Brooklyn to Greenport on Long Island, attending to the local, to the needs of the local families who happened to be Roman Catholic on Long Island. There were very few, about 30, I think, in all. But he attended to their needs, and through an influx of people who happened to be Roman Catholic from Scotland, Ireland, and England, who landed in Sag Harbor in the 1790s through the 1820s. He was the co-builder of the first Catholic church on Long Island, St. Andrews in Sag Harbor in 1845, and was the second pastor. So we have some roots here on Long Island going way back. And according to family tradition, he wanted to stay on Long Island, but the Depression hit and he had to leave at some point because you couldn't make a living on Long Island in any capacity, and everybody was starving. This is back in 1845 or 1855, whenever it was, which shows you nothing has changed. So my father arrived here in the 1930s, coaching all the sports at LaSalle Military Academy, and he enjoyed that very much. and as I said, got very much immersed in the local community. He married my mother in 1935, and they settled here in Sayville. And one of the first things my father did was, he was a lawyer, he started practicing law with a man named Levy. And he and Ira were together for 20 years. And in the early part of their practice together, they were so poor. They were on 85 South Main Street or South Country Road. They were so poor that they used to play cards all day long. And Ira's father, Joe, and Ira's mother, Tessie Tannenbaum Levy, supported my father and my mother. Supported the family. They were such close friends. And I remember Tessie, when I grew up as a kid, Tessie was a large lady who the folds of her dress was so big to me when I was 3 or 4 years old, she'd hide me from my mother. And I loved Tessie Tannenbaum Levy. She was adorable and wonderful and very good to me. Anyway, Joe Levy, my father always said, was the nicest man he ever met in his life. And Joe Levy owned the old Foster House, if you know it, in Sayville. And Joe Levy always gave out cigars to anybody he ever saw. And when he died, because there was no synagogue in Sayville, he was buried from the Congregational Church on South Main Street. And his coffin was open, unlike in the Jewish tradition, but his coffin was open. And at least 20 cigars were seen on his coffin from people who remembered him that way. He was a wonderful man, gave so much to the community, and as I said, he supported my family for a few years. Ira, my father, were law partners and were very close friends, and it's unique to note that Ira and my father were law partners on a handshake. You wouldn't find that today. Everything was done on a handshake. And when Ira went off to war in World War II, my father maintained the law practice, and according to the other close personal friend of the family, Peter Lerner, Dr. Lerner, every penny was accounted for when Ira was away at war. Ira was a war hero, too. He won the Bronze Star for heroism in World War II. We in Sayville are quite fortunate to have a few people who actually were highly decorated soldiers in World War II. One is Dennis O'Doherty, if any of you know the O'Doherty family. He won 5 Bronze Stars in World War II. He never talks about it, but he's highly decorated war hero from World War II. George McInerney. Judge McInerney, the Supreme Court Justice who died some years ago. The McInerney family's in the woodwork here, as is my family. He was given the Distinguished Flying Cross, the second highest honor given for an airman in World War II for bravery and heroism. And his brother John, who was a wonderful, wonderful man, who's going to turn 100 in a few months. He was also a colonel in the Army in World War II, and George ended up a brigadier general. They're very brave people Sayville produced in the war. My father tried to get into the war. This is the funny story. He tried to get into the Navy because he had a contract to coach the Great Lake Naval Training Station football team, backfield. And the coach of the Great Lakes Naval Training Station was a man named Meehan, who had been the coach at NYU. My father, and he were friendly, and he wanted my father to be his coach at the backfield. But my father went into Pine Street in New York City to get his induction papers with a man named Harvey Stryker from Sayville. If you all know Harvey, any of you might know Harvey Stryker, was another friend of the family. Harvey had perfect health. Harvey had tuberculosis. My father had perfect health. Somehow, after they came home, Harvey was drafted, and my father was rejected for having galloping consumption and told he had 6 months to live. Now, he lived 50 more years. But what they were thinking, I don't know. But Harvey, to his dying day, always said, they switched the records. But I don't know if that's so or not. In 1937, my father and Ira Levy and Peter Lerner, Dr. Lerner, maybe any of you remember Dr. Lerner? He was a great man, a lovely, lovely man. I had the privilege of speaking at his funeral. I gave a eulogy at his funeral. One close personal friend of the family, when in 1937, Ira and Dr. Lerner and my father bought land on Fire Island, 1,500 feet from Bay to Ocean, which they sold in 1946 for $11 profit each. The land is now the middle of Fire Island Pines. They used to get together for a kick-me party every year. Because of that fact. In 1948, my father and Stanley Greaves and Joe Heinlein and I think Bill Weinberg and a few other gentlemen founded the Sayville Chamber of Commerce. And my father became the first president of the Sayville Chamber of Commerce. And I remember as a 10-year-old child, I'm 74, going around Sayville taking the census. We had 3,000 people in Sayville at the time. And everybody knew everybody. And when I was a kid going to grammar school and local schools, you knew everybody. You knew everybody in town. You knew all their business also. Who'd be having a martini at 10 o'clock in the morning, or who'd be doing this, or who'd be doing that. It was a wonderful place to grow up. Sayville was idyllic. Nobody locked anyone's doors or anything like that. How times have changed. But the founding of the Sayville Chamber of Commerce was one of my father's major programs at the time. He really believed that Sayville, as a wonderful hamlet that it is, should have an active chamber, and he and his friends set it up, and it's thrived ever since. At that same time, my father was on the Islip Planning Board and was trying to get a South Service Road for Sayville. When he became Islip Town Supervisor in the 50s, he again tried to get that South Service Road, and he failed at the opportunity to do it. But I had the distinct pleasure when I was Islip Town Supervisor in the 70s of getting that South Service Road. And my father, when I became Town Supervisor, said there's a few things I'd like you to do for Sayville, and that was one of them, and I was happy to do it. We also tried to get a North Service Road, but we had too many problems in buying land going through the Greeley Avenue from Lincoln Avenue, so we weren't able to do that. But a number of things that Sayville have come from my father's ideas way back when. One idea he had when he was town supervisor, and I wish he was able to do it, but it was too expensive, was to put underground all the wires in the town of Islip. But the cost at the time was $2 billion. That's in 1956. Couldn't do it. As a result of that, it never happened. After having been the town supervisor, or even before, my father was also practicing law with Ira. And they had a great practice because Ira would always tell you what you could do, what you couldn't do, and my father would tell you what you could do. So they balanced each other perfectly. And my father had been a Democrat and Ira was a Republican. Then when my father became a Republican, Ira became a Democrat. It was always important in a law firm to have a person of either party because you never know who you're dealing with. And therefore they balanced things out. And my father is probably the only man we know of in New York State history to run for 2 offices as a Democrat. He ran for Islip Town Supervisor as a Democrat and District Attorney of Suffolk County as a Democrat. Lost both times in the 30s, early 40s. He then ran again and was elected Suffolk County District Attorney. He also became Islip Town Supervisor. So we think he's the only person who's done that in the history of New York State, twice. After having been town supervisor, he became district attorney of Suffolk County in 1956 by election. Interesting, he had the record at the time of having represented more first-degree murderers, people who've been indicted for first-degree murder, than anyone else on Long Island. 12. He represented 12 men who'd murdered their wives or done all the horrible things as a defense attorney, and none of them were convicted of first-degree murder. Some were acquitted, some were convicted of second-degree murder, some of manslaughter, etc., but none were convicted of first-degree murder. He's proud of that record, but then he ends up as district attorney, and he's trying people for first-degree murder. And he didn't believe in the operation of the death penalty, so he'd be happy to take a plea to second-degree murder. He also didn't believe in wiretapping. As a district attorney, he didn't believe in wiretapping, but he said that Henry Stimson, who was the Secretary of State under Herbert Hoover and Secretary of War under Franklin D. Roosevelt in World War II, was told that we'd broken the Japanese code. And he said, no, gentlemen, do not read other people's mail. Too bad he didn't know what he was doing when that point was so long. But anyway, my father, district attorney, his most prominent prosecution was Francis Henry Bloth, who murdered 3 people in 3 separate delicatessens on the South Shore of Long Island in Islip and West Hampton Beach and Smithtown, North Shore also. And Bloth just needed the money, and he murdered these people in cold blood. My father got a conviction, and Bloth was sentenced to death. Eventually, through Newsday's overwrought attitude towards him, his conviction was reversed. He was then retried and sentenced to prison for life. He said, though, that when he was convicted, that if he ever got out of jail, he was going to murder my father and murder his lawyer, Sidney Simon, who was a lawyer in Bay Shore. So my father and Sidney Simon used to get together and say, hasn't gotten me yet, has it gotten you? that was quite something. But after having been district attorney for 2 terms, 6 years, my father went on the Supreme Court, County Court, Supreme Court, and served for 22 years. He became the chief judge of the area, administrative judge, and also set up the district court system here in Suffolk County, implemented it, also helped implement the Suffolk County Police when that was started, and in tribute to the activities that he engaged in over many years, he had the court complex in Central Islip named for him by the state and the county. And he much enjoyed living in Sayville. He loved Sayville. He used to attend the local football games. He rooted for Sayville High School. His most proud moment in life, I think, was when he was coach of LaSalle Military Academy in 1932, and the team, his football team, went 8-0, and he was voted Prep School Coach of the Year. And that to him was more important than anything else he ever did in some ways. And I always got a kick out of that because of the fact that he did so much with his career and with his life. And he and my mother were married for just about 50 years, and they were exact opposites because my mother had a great sense of humor. It was very earthy and very funny, very musically inclined. My father's only interest in music was he loved opera, and he used to refer to Giacomo Puccini as the ear of God and Enrico Caruso as the voice of God. I guess we could all agree with that. But my mother was very funny, and she kept him in tow because he sometimes could be too serious, and my mother would shape him up and say, "That's not a good thing to do." As a matter of fact, I'm speaking off color, but my mother used to refer to my father when she ordered him to put out the garbage, "Hush it, Harry, put out the garbage." So she kept him from getting too much of an ego. But I must say he was a wonderful father. My mother was a wonderful mother. My sister's a wonderful sister, and I'm very happy to be part of the family that I've been born into, and thank you very much. There's one other thing I should mention. As you all know, the race every year, the chamber race, is named in honor of my father, and that was brought about by Simon Stein, another very close friend of the family, who did so much for our community, and it was through Simon's efforts that the Sayville Chamber has named that race in honor of my father, and so I also toast Simon and all the other people who have done so much for my family over so many years, all my father's close friends and the people who have made our lives in Sayville so wonderful. It's a great place to be. And I want to thank you, all of you from the Sayville Village Improvement Society, for inviting me to be here today. This is a wonderful group that you have for over so many years. You're the backbone of Sayville, you and the Chamber, and you've both done so much. I should throw in the Garden Club also, have done so much to benefit our community. And without you and the work you do, Sayville would not be the little adorable hamlet that it is. And I say that because I was born here on Candy Avenue.